Welcome to the Sutherland Report. Thank you so much for giving me your time, the privilege of your time, and for joining me. I'm continuing my series where I have the privilege to interview prospective parliamentary candidates for Reform UK in this amazing nation called the United Kingdom. I put the map up of that to remind us of our beautiful country. So I am now going to be interviewing Mathew Moody, who is in Penrith and Solway. Mathew will then explain where another very, very beautiful part of our country is. Mathew, thank you so much for joining me. We have fought through some major tech issues and here we are. So thank you very much for your time, sir.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, not at all. So Mathew, I'm just going to bring up that other map again of the UK, and then I'll bring the map that of the actual constituency there. So here we are. So as we do have international viewers helping us to give that UK shape, whereabouts are we on that map in regard to your constituency?
Yeah, so Penrith and Solway is right at the tip of England, literally just below the Scottish border. So if we go up north from Manchester, it is diagonally across from Newcastle. So it's kind of on the intersection, just below Carlisle. So you can see the top of Newcastle along. You've got a nice little edge where the country comes out. That's going into Scotland. We're right up at the top. So formerly this was known as Penrith and the Border, which was the largest constituency in England. Now it's Penrith and Solway. I don't think it's the largest now, it may be the second, but it's a significantly big and very varied constituency.
But it is as this just bring this map up just shows us how whereabouts it is and how large it is, which is quite extensive. Mathew, yesterday when we were, I said in a sense dating it, but then our previous discussions, and I was really getting a sense of how large the constituency is. It is an area that I do know fairly well, and it is absolutely beautiful. Mathew, when you are out and about, and what are the conversations that you're having with constituents, and what are the concerns that they are bringing to you, and also in the same time helping to answer that? Could you describe the makeup of the constituency, farmland, towns, etc.? So we go from there, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So Penrith and Solway stretches from the coast, where we go down to Maryport, which is just above Whitehaven and Workington. It goes all the way up the coast along the Solway Firth, which is a fantastic, beautiful coastline that overlooks Scotland and Dumfries and Galloway. That meanders up to just underneath Carlisle, and then Carlisle we kind of scoop underneath. We have a little bit of Carlisle, kind of strange. And then from there on, we go across the fells, the Pennines, essentially, to Alston, which is obviously up on the top of the Pennines, very isolated, fantastic town, but, probably about 30 minutes plus from Penrith. And then that then comes back down through to Penrith. And then we kind of cut across and down a little bit, skirting above the top of Ullswater, down to Keswick. We also then follow it down a little bit further to Buttermere, which for those of you that are walkers will know is a phenomenal place, very rural, obviously, across to Cockermouth, and then that meets back up to Maryport. So there are within the constituency 8 towns and 180 villages. So it is a sizable area. It's obviously very rural in nature, but at the same time, because you've got the towns, some of them are very tourist centric, some of them are more industrial centric. So you've got that kind of interplay going on.
Brilliant. So when you're describing there tourist centric, industrial centric, what's the industry there? How are people earning their living in this amazing constituency?
So clearly there is a lot of farmland. and most of the rural areas are covered and dotted with farmlands here, there, and everywhere. That's a mixture of arable. We have very good arable fields up in the certainly around the Solway coast, and then obviously the further south you go, which is kind of strange, but then makes sense. You get into the fringes of the Lake District National Park, and there you're going to find more hill farmers, upland farmers, so sheep, that type of thing. We've got quite a few cattle around here as well, providing milk. So that then feeds into some of the industry around here. So we have big milk producers. We have huge producers of grain. Forestry is obviously a big one here in terms of making products from the forests. And then some of the towns then have specific industry going on, whether it's Penrith, who has some very large factories producing all manner of goods. Wigton has some large factories, and they're involved in all kinds of different industries. They're not necessarily specifically one per se. The further south you go down, that's more known as the nuclear coast, because obviously you've got Sellafield, but that's just outside my constituency. So it is a blend of different industries providing jobs to people, and obviously hospitality is also very, very big.
When you're saying nuclear, there's a nuclear plant there on the coast, so that what you've just mentioned. So what concerns are the great constituents of the great constituent members of Penrith and Solway bringing to you? What are the discussions that you are having?
I mean, when I'm out and about talking to people, a lot of the concerns are the ones you'd expect to find, which is we're sick and tired of what's going on, and we're fed up of being taken for granted, and there are issues everywhere you look. So whether that is crumbling infrastructure, lack of road networks, the fact that certainly in the rural areas, there is no such thing as super fast broadband. It doesn't exist. I'm talking to you right now from a mobile broadband device, which hopefully will last the journey. You've got issues around obviously farmers being pulled out of farming per se for food and crops and livestock, and being told to no, plant trees or do a bit of rewilding because it's going to help the environment, which isn't what they're necessarily focused on doing. They're not necessarily set up to doing it, and also having massive interference from Defra on a whole manner of things. And then, you've also got the issues around, the whole cost of everything and the lack of joined up thinking, which comes to bear in everything that we talk about. So there's not necessarily one issue per se, as there never is, but there's a whole multitude of issues that people are just getting to the stage where they just can't fathom what can go wrong next, because everything that has gone wrong can go wrong and has gone wrong. And at the same time, it seems that the political bodies, whether it be local or national, seem to have lost touch of the fact that they are meant to rule and work on our behalf. They're not meant to rule and tell us what to do and how to do it. So I think that's certainly something that comes through a lot. And there's a lot of angry people as well about just the lack of accountability and the fact that nothing gets done. Penrith is a particular example of that, where they have a huge issue with what's known locally as the Penrith Pong, which is essentially a very, very stinky atmosphere caused by certain industries in the town, creating this smell, which is horrendous if you're ever in Penrith, and those of you listening or watching from Penrith will know what I mean. And despite numerous complaints to the environmental agency, this agency, that agency, nothing is done about it. So I think people are, to me, when I go out, they're at the end of their tether. They want government that will do what it says it will do. It will deliver on its promises, and it will sort out a lot of the mess that we have, around the constituency and around the nation.
You paint in many ways. You paint a fascinating picture and summarize extremely well, because knowing that area, people know what they want, and they're very, they're just, their opinions are very clearly defined. They know that there is a problem. There are problems, as what's going on up and down the country. When you talk about the infrastructure, you were just talking about that issue in regard to Penrith. In one sense, it's sadly it's the usual questions in many ways. What about people being able to have GP appointments? What about hospital services in regard to the constituents? And I can appreciate that people are having to drive quite a long way. Schools, are there enough schools, school places, etc., etc.? If you're talking about the infrastructure, could you define that any more? What certain issues are?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you take say schools as the first piece, we obviously have schools around the constituency. We have a number of primary and secondary schools, and they are doing the job to the best of their ability. What we sadly lack is the ability for further and specialized education. So when it gets to the stage where someone is at, say, that 16-year-old level and thinking, well, what do I want to do next? Clearly, university isn't for everyone. No matter how much the government may push that, it just isn't. And there's a lot of youngsters who are particularly skilled and particularly good at working with their hands. So whether that is engineering, construction, agricultural, forestry, even IT to some degree, then there needs to be specialized courses and apprenticeships for those people, and there just isn't. One of the most famous agricultural colleges that we had in all of Cumbria was Newton Rig, and that shut down a few years ago due to lack of funding and costs to run it and so on and so forth. And to my mind, it's one of those things where a decision is made by someone that has no knowledge of the area, no knowledge of what the residents need and require in the area, and just yet another short-term, short-sighted decision where a college that had 500 plus young people going to it, an agricultural college that then obviously feeds into the rest of Cumbria and keeps them within Cumbria, just shuts. So then the nearest opportunity for them to go and learn those same skills is in Carlisle, which is, a 45-mile round trip, which is just ridiculous for a young person at the age of 16. And are there routes to get there? Kind of. There are buses and kind of trains from the main centres, but it's not an easy journey. It's not just go to the next town over 3 or 4 or 5 miles away. So yeah, that's certainly an issue that comes up time and time again, that we have young people that wish to educate themselves, but they just don't have the capabilities. And also what we're finding is, because of the excessive insurance premiums right now, and the ability to get into transportation, that is essentially putting young people off. They just can't afford to either get a bike and run it, or get a license and then a bike, or even get a bike and insure it. They can do one of 3 things, basically: have a bike but can't ride it legally, they can get a license but no bike, or they might be able to get a bike but can't insure it. So it's just nonsense, at its highest level. And I think that then feeds into the fact that we then have people leaving the area because the nearest places that are really good are maybe not in Cumbria anymore, because the expertise has been dropped, it's been taken out. It's just vanished and dissipated. It's not being replaced by anything, no matter what the education bodies may tell you. It just hasn't been. So that's certainly an issue. In terms of health, I mean, we're blessed in some ways that some of the smaller towns have easier access to, say, GPs, because there's less people here for sure. But in terms of the next step on, that isn't any different to the rest of the country. There's still huge waiting lists to access consultants and get operations done. And the hospitals in this area are okay, but they're not great. So you will find a lot of people actually going to places like Newcastle for operations and such like, because that's where the excellence is at this moment in time, in this kind of northwest, northeast corner, not necessarily in our area, which is sad, because it should be everywhere. So whilst we do have a large number of what I'd call community hospitals that do offer a certain level of care, when you're going into more advanced operations, it's the same issue that you've experienced probably in a lot of the other constituents that you've spoken to. So it is definitely a struggle. And as for dentists, well, forget it. There are no NHS dentists that I'm aware of in Cumbria. They don't exist. They're zero, zilch, nada, gone. It's private or don't have a dentist.
Wow, Mathew, you paint a very, very detailed picture. Just referring to that college, how many years ago did that disappear, or is it a few years ago, number of months? Sorry to put yourself on the spot.
2 to 3 years.
Right.
2 to 3 years. Yeah, they stopped formal education, I think, in 21.
Right. And there was no, sorry, I'm putting you on the spot in one sense, but there was no sort of local consultation over this. There was no discussion with the local businesses looking at the future needs. So there was no future planning at all.
Well, Mark, you and I both know that whatever consultation happens from government isn't a consultation. It's just to make people feel that they've had their voice heard. And it's one of the things that I bang on about a lot. And I've said this in the areas and places I've been invited to talk to, that consultations are just a waste of time. They mean nothing to the political elite or the local government or the civil service. They couldn't care less about them. I'm happy to say that on record because that's my experience. Having contributed to numerous public consultations, doesn't matter what people think locally, they have no interest in them. I'm from Yorkshire originally. I moved around the country. I was in the Midlands for a while. I'm now in Cumbria. I'm happy to call it my home, and I'm actively working for the people here. But I've been involved in situations where good tier middle schools have been shut down in an area where I was, purely because the local government didn't want to fund them anymore. So it doesn't matter that the quality of education was superb. It didn't matter that you had this really good system going on where at the age of, I think it was eight or nine, the children would go from primary to a middle school, and they would be there between the ages of 8 to 13, learning far more advanced things than they learn at secondary school, I hasten to add. Doesn't matter. You can have as many consultations as you like. Once the local government or the civil service or whoever's made up their minds, a consultation is just a paper ticking exercise to say, well, we had one and there was a little bit of furore about it, but really we couldn't care less because we're going to do our own thing anyhow. And that is my opinion on the subject. And whilst I wasn't here when that happened with Newton Rigg, I can imagine it was exactly the same thing that happened there.
I hear you. Could you lay out the present income? Well, of course, there are no members of Parliament as Parliament has been dissolved because we have this election on the 4th of July. Could you explain the previous then incumbent, what party they're from? Could you give them a makeup of the council politically across the constituency?
Yeah, I mean that is interesting, and I'm not sure I'll have details by council because we have a lot of them. But what I would say is that because this border was essentially, it's been amalgamated from parts of Penrith and the border and parts of Whitehaven and Workington. Both of those were Tory seats. Penrith and the border was always a Tory seat, has been since 1950. That's how long. Whitehaven and Workington was always a Labour seat until 2019 when the Tories won that, with the whole red wall and Boris and everything. So at the moment, we are effectively fighting against what has been, to some degrees, at least 2/3 of it a Tory heartland, the other third of it maybe a Labour heartland. And in terms of the makeup, that is something I should probably know off the top of my head, but I don't. The issue we have in Cumbria is, for reasons known only to local government, national government, and whoever pays the money to make up these nonsensical things, is Cumbria was divided into 2 unitary authorities a couple of years ago. So that's why we haven't had any local elections this year. So we now have Cumberland Council and Westmoreland and Lonsdale Council. Sorry, Westmoreland and Furness Council. Apologies. Westmoreland and Lonsdale is one of the constituencies, but the council is Westmoreland and Furness. So when we're getting our information for the election, it comes from 2 separate councils. we deal with 2 separate councils for all of the different things in terms of, you know, the number of voters, the number of absentees, etc. Now, in terms of their makeup, I believe Cumberland is Labour, Westmoreland and Furness I would have to check. But what is interesting is a lot of, obviously, the larger towns have their own town councils, of course, and they differ widely between Labour, Lib Dem. You know, there's a few that were kind of, were majority independent, but often they've kind of lost the majority through to ganging up tactics by other parties. So yeah, it's interesting because clearly, you know, Reform UK being a new party, we didn't fight as good a fight as we could have done in the local elections, and certainly in Cumbria we didn't have the opportunity to do that anyhow, because that was last year and we were really just getting started then. So I'm optimistic for the future that when it comes around again, we will be putting forward local councillors under the Reform UK banner and trying to really make a difference in some of these towns, because some of the things that are going on is just ridiculous, utterly ridiculous and nonsensical. And I think it comes down to that point I made earlier about there is no accountability or transparency anywhere. There's just decisions being made, secret ballots being passed, and no one knows what's going on.
When you refer to, and of course you refer to it, when you're referring to things like secret ballots, where are the, could you expand on that? Define what you mean, define where these secret ballots are actually being used. Is that in regard to council decisions? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've had various feedback from former councillors that this kind of activity goes on. Obviously, I don't necessarily want to name the councillors per se, or even the councillors, but it is a concern that they've brought to me, they've raised with me and said, you know, there's things going on at council which are not proper, they're not right. And essentially it's another example of why politics needs changing, and that's why Reform UK is in this fight now, because it's just so dirty, and it needs to change, because this is not acceptable. You know, it'll come down to things such as, you know, you might have a, you know, really good independent candidate and they've won a particular seat or award, and they're based effectively on representing the people, and then they start getting conduct complaints about them, which are superfluous and made up, and just complaints about conduct in office. And they haven't actually done anything wrong. It's a way of getting rid of someone. And as I say, these are concerns and issues that have been raised to me by not one person, but multiple people. So this seems to be a thing that is going on at our councils, which obviously the general public doesn't know about, because, you know, why would they? These kind of things are kept quiet. And when, you know, the public is saying, well, why is the council making this decision and why are they doing this? Well, there's your answer. It's because the people that are in the council want to keep the power, and they want to do what they want to do. And we don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but we suspect some of the reasons why that might be happening.
That raises a very interesting, thank you, Mathew, for saying that. That raises a very interesting issue, because then in regard to Westminster Parliament, we have what's called the ministerial code, the code of conduct for ministers that are then in cabinet making decisions. But this was embedded a number of years ago, then redefined. But what it does is then gives people the power, as you've said, to then get ministers out, then allowing civil servants to make complaints to get ministers out. And I think you could then argue that one of the infamous cases of that would be getting someone out like Dominic Raab. So if ministers are then saying to their civil servants, could I have this, please? Could we have this report written, you know, in the next hour? And then people turning around and going, oh, he's bullying me, etc. People may not be fully aware of this, because what you're then describing, Mathew, is absolutely brilliantly, is the disconnect between people then voting and saying, right, okay, brilliant, we're going to get this done. And then it's not being explained to us that they've got the ministerial code. There are all these other things going on that mean, well, we're going to force this candidate out. No, that is what is going on. But Mathew, thank you for saying that. So a question that seems fairly obvious in one, maybe a bit of a stupid question. Does that mean that where you are, not just because of geography as well, compounded, do people feel a complete and utter disconnect with Westminster, with London? Does it, without putting words in your mouth, does it seem like it's on a different planet?
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely correct. I think we do live obviously in a beautiful part of the world, and we obviously have a lot of visitors that come here too and appreciate that beauty. But at the same time, the day-to-day things that are affecting people here are completely different to what's happening in Westminster and London. And the decisions that are being made down in the capital bear no relation to daily life here. So I'll give you a prime example. And I recorded a video on this yesterday in terms of some of the things I'm really passionate about sorting out. So this whole net zero nonsense, and I'll call it nonsense because it is, because we're literally the only country in the world that are literally trying to bankrupt ourselves to create some kind of contribution to CO2 emissions that will actually make zero difference whatsoever across the globe. I mean, nothing, zero, nada, nothing. And I'm happy to discuss that with any so-called scientist because it's nonsense. But that aside, this whole thing about the ban on gas and oil boilers, most of the constituents in the 180 villages that I've been around, I've not been around them all, I'm trying, and I've got some wonderful volunteers also going around and dropping leaflets off and such like. Most of those are not on mains gas. There's no opportunity, never will be an opportunity to put gas in because the companies would never do it. It would be cost prohibitive. So the only option you then have to heat your home is oil or potentially LPG. Now, at this moment in time, I would say a lot of Cumbria is driven by oil and probably some element as well of stoves, burning wood and such like, because we do have a lot of wood here and we do have trees fall down all the time. I've got a couple in my garden that fell down. So when Westminster say they're banning, gas and oil boilers, what they don't tell the general public, again, which I think is a travesty and it lacks transparency, is the boiler manufacturers are basically getting fined for all oil and gas boilers they sell beyond a certain percentage. I don't know what the exact percentage is. You can go and find that out online. It does exist somewhere, but they're being fined. So this is why oil and gas boiler prices are also going up, because every time they're selling one over and above the quota, they're getting fined. But there is no other option here locally. And, people will say to me, oh, we'll get an air heat source pump. They don't work and they're more expensive. And I know this for a fact, an actual fact, because I have had quotes myself for fitting an air heat source pump. Because don't get me wrong, I'm very keen on working with the latest, environmentally friendly technology to better heat my house, because my house is cold in the winter. It is, because it's an old house. So I'm very keen on how to better improve things. But based on the quotes I've had at this moment in time, I will be spending an extra £6,000 to £7,000 a year in electric to use an air heat source pump to heat my house, which actually doesn't heat my house to the same degree as an oil boiler. In fact, I would still be wandering around probably wearing a coat most of the time because it only gets to about 55 degrees. So there's a huge disconnect between what these idiots at Westminster say, and I'll call them idiots because they're clueless, and what the actual normal person, out in the sticks, certainly in Cumbria, is trying to do in terms of just heating their house. It's just ridiculous. And that's just one example. There are many others.
Well, the other thing is, of course, so you and I can discuss basic science. So we need trees taking CO2 and they produce oxygen. And if they're not producing oxygen, then we will not be able to breathe, and we'll not be able to have this conversation. So without it sounding too conspiratorial, I would point people in regard to a direction of Agenda 21 and Agenda 30, and we are not making any of this up. And you are describing turning around and saying, well, hold on a minute, people actually die of cold. If they're not able to heat their homes, then they are going to die of cold. And this is an issue, a huge, very, very important issue. But thank you, Mathew, for clarifying that. This would be a really good point for you to say, how can people reach out to you? What is your email? If people want to reach out and help you, how can they do that, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. So the email is penrithandsolway@reformuk.com. We're also very active on social media. So you can find me on Facebook, X, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. And typically that'll be some version of Reform UK Penrith. If you put that in, we'll pop up somewhere somehow. Very, very keen, very happy to accept any help from anyone that would like to get involved and help us campaign.
Brilliant. Mathew, what is we're running up to this election. It's a few days away. So what are you able to do any hustings again? What coverage have you had in the local papers? So over the next few days, how's your campaign looking? You said a wonderful thing as you've got 180 villages that you are trying to reach, and all credit to you, because I completely appreciate the geographical challenges. And just say, when you were talking about young people having to drive a 45-mile journey to a college, we're not talking on a motorway, are we? We're talking on two lane roads, at times twisting and turning, and we can't see around the next corner, which then defines how fast we're going. So what is the campaign strategy that's going on over the next few days?
Yeah, so a couple of interesting points you raised there. Let's address hustings first. I mean, hustings, I feel, is a good way of expressing your opinion and being challenged on it, because then it makes you think about your opinion and what you've said, and also what's in the contract with the people, which is our version of the manifesto. Today, there has been no hustings whatsoever in the constituency with all of the candidates. A couple of reasons for that, as far as I can tell from people that have tried to organise hustings. The Tory candidate has received death threats, which I think is abysmal and shocking and outrageous, and is rightly concerned for his life and security and turning up. So I 100% understand where he's coming from in terms of being cautious about security, and without any kind of guarantees for security. And what guarantees can you really have unless you have the police there? And even then, if someone wants to turn up, they can turn up. So that has been an issue in terms of him disengaging from hustings. Labour have also disengaged from hustings. To be honest, they've ignored most hustings requests. And we've had a lot, and I've responded to every single one of them with pleasure. I'd love to attend. We've had them from churches wanting to organise on behalf of their community in Keswick and Cockermouth. We've had them on behalf of the farmers, wanting to organise a big one. We've had them on behalf of education, wanting to organise one. We've even had them on behalf of News and Star, what the local newspapers trying to organise one. None of them have happened whatsoever. So the only hustings that will be taking place is actually tomorrow in Penrith at a school with some of the candidates for Penrith and Solway. So myself, the Labour and Lib Dem candidates will be there. The Tory candidate had, up until a few days ago, got the Carlisle ex-MP to come along, but I don't believe they're coming now. And the Green Party are being represented by a councillor, because they are nowhere to be seen. I mean, the Greens, I don't know, they've kind of completely checked out of this campaign in this constituency. So it has been tough in terms of being able to discuss and debate things. And the only hustings I've been to so far within the general election, because I've been to a few earlier in the year, was over in Egremont with a motorcycle bike action group. And that was really good and very interesting, and some good questions, some good points. But what was really interesting is there was Lib Dem and Tories there. Labour again just didn't turn up, couldn't be bothered, not interested, just so arrogant, I can't even begin to tell you. But the Lib Dem guy is a lovely guy, pretty much agreed with most of what I and the Tory guy said. And the Tory guy said most of his points and policies were against the Tory manifesto. So it was kind of like, well, you say you're a Tory, but really you're more of a reform guy, if I'm being honest. So it was an interesting husting. So that's kind of happened. And I think in terms of newspapers and radio and TV, we've been invited to certain things and we've had some coverage. Because we're a small team, we're not as good at getting the message out because we just don't have the staff. So I'd say some of the other parties have maybe had more coverage, but that's because they've sent articles in or statements or this, that, and the other. And we just really haven't time to do that. But we've certainly had some exposure for sure. There's a BBC hustings taking place next week, but that'll be from across Cumbria. So it won't be me versus, say, my opponents. It's across Cumbria, so that should be interesting. That's a radio one. So yeah, in terms of what we're doing right now, it's really focusing on visibility. We're getting a load more boards coming in today. We're focusing on leafleting out to certain key areas that we want to make sure we've got the message out to, and we've got some big street stalls coming up over the weekend. And then some very special activities happening next week, which I'll keep under wraps for now.
Brilliant, Mathew. Thank you for just defining that and what you're up to. It's fascinating, as you said, being at that bike event and then suddenly realizing that the political opponents, particularly as you said, the Tory candidate, there's a lot of similarities, which does make sense. In many ways, alludes to some of the problems of our politics, because you just think, why can't there are basic things we need. We need the infrastructure in place. We need a vision for the future. And where can we unite in regard to that? So, Mathew, thank you for saying how people can reach you. I'd encourage you to get some press releases out in that spare time that you don't have, and to do that. And it's fantastic you've got this opportunity with radio. And I'm very sad to hear that death threats and people think that that's an appropriate way to behave, and it's not an appropriate way to behave. It's very interesting, isn't it, when parties won't step forward for a debate. It's as if to say, what are they? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we just wonder what people are hiding sometimes, don't we, in regard to not being able to converse with them. Are farmers under pressure to give over their fields in regard to, as Rob Reaney and Bolsover says, double glaze their fields, to put solar panels in fields? What about issues like that, and in regard to food security?
Well, yeah, I mean, farmers are under immense pressure, and I live in a farming community. I live next door to a farm, so I know how hard the farmers work. I mean, they are working 7 days a week. They don't have any time off. There's always something that they have to do, and there's always things that go wrong. So obviously, if you've got a large estate that you're managing, things happen. So, I think it's one of those things where, yet again, people in Westminster are making decisions on behalf of rural people who know better. But because these decisions have been made, if you're looking at this from the perspective of just, well, what income do I need to come in to cover what I'm going to basically, use or spend, then they are looking at these grants. And there's grants for no manner of various random things that they can get their hands on. And obviously there's caveats and things that go with them, but there's so many grants that are available to stop them farming. It's just insane. And I think one of the issues we've got is the fact that there is continual interference from Defra to basically, in my opinion, another civil service department just justifying its existence. Farmers are spending 15 to 20 hours a week on paperwork. I mean, why? This whole cattle movement thing about, we move some cattle from this field to another field. I mean, seriously, it's ridiculous. We've got farmers that can't use particular brands of rat poison anymore unless they go on a Defra approved training course, which is a day, and obviously there's a cost to it, and then join a scheme, which there's another cost to it because they're not deemed worthy. They may have been doing it for 50 years, but Defra know better. Well, they don't know better. I'd argue that most of the people at Defra have never been on a farm. In fact, I spoke to a farm the other day. It said he's got about 12 people that have never been on a farm telling him how to manage his farm. It's just utter nonsense. And it's yet another thing that we talk about a lot at Reform UK is we've got to get rid of all of this nonsense. We need low government, low taxes, high growth. We're not going to get it in the way it's happening right now. And you've just got to look at supermarket price fixing as just one example of where, yet again, government has failed completely in terms of protecting farmers. Farmers are growing crops, obviously. They're raising livestock. They want to sell them. They want to sell them for the best price they can. Often they're selling them at a loss because no one's protecting their interests, really. I see a random amount of things that come out of the NFU, and I think, well, I'm not really sure you've just jumped on this whole net zero thing, in my opinion, but it's a tough one because without food security, the nation is in peril at any one stage. And given that we're importing hundreds of thousands of tons of food into the UK every year, when we actually could grow a lot of it ourselves in the country, you just have to ask the question, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this when we have some of the most fertile farmland in Europe? Why are we doing this? So it makes no sense to me. I think it's yet another example of lack of joined up thinking, lack of understanding from Westminster and London about what living rurally and working rurally is. And it's just another issue that farmers have to deal with day in, day out, and wonder how they're going to make the money work this month or this week because they've got so much pressure on them.
When you're saying Defra, could you define, for viewers, Defra for us?
So it's the Department for Farm and Rural Affairs. It changes its title over the years, but normally it's like any government department. It's a department of how not to work best and how to interfere in your life and actually add no value to your life whatsoever. That's what it comes down to. I mean, this nonsense I've seen recently about if you've got a chicken that you have to lay eggs for you, you have to register it. I'm sorry, it's just gone too far. I mean, what difference does it make if I have one chicken living in my house or two cats or a dog and a parakeet? It makes no difference to government. Frankly, it's not any concern of government. So if I want to have a chicken to lay eggs, I'll have a chicken to lay eggs. I don't have any right now, just in case anyone wants to know, but it's something I would consider doing. But yeah, there's just far too much overreach, far too much bureaucratic red tape and nonsense, and it's just got to stop. And I don't see any other party even talking about this because, let's face it, they're not interested. Labour is the urban elite. Lib Dems, they talk a good talk, but really, and as for the Tories, well, they lost the plot many years ago, which is why Reform UK is here. So
you're within your constituency, the member of parliament, because Parliament has been dissolved. Did that member of Parliament, were they a local person or were they, as we call, parachuted in by central office?
Certainly, the opponent I'm running against was local. Yes, local, born and bred, been here many years, and to all intents and purposes, is respected as a constituency MP. Was in UKIP, would hasten to add, jumped ship, got the Tory vote, and it's fine, and I think it's fine being a good constituency MP. The problem we've got nowadays is good constituency MP can't necessarily stand up for his constituents if he's forced to vote the way that the party whip wishes you to vote. And I think that's one of the differences we have with Reform UK generally is we have said and always have said that we will not have a party whip system. We will leave individual MPs their ability to make their own mind up based on the information presented to them, their opinion, and also what their constituents think and feel about the issue.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for laying that out. We're just coming to the end of a fascinating conversation, and I thank you for your time and thank you for that. Just wanted if you just remind people where they can get hold of you to step forward to help and also to engage with you and ask any question that they wish to do. So if you could lay that information out again, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So best email is penrithandsolway at reformuk.com, and it's spell and we're all over social media. So I post videos regularly on a whole number of issues. Thankfully I have a person helping me at the moment do that, so I just had to record them and figure out some way of uploading them using my rubbish mobile internet, or trying to go to a hotel as we did yesterday, and that didn't work. But yeah, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X, I am on there. You can obviously interact and follow me on there and engage. Generally, it's Reform UK Penrith. If it's not, it's a variant of that. But if you put that in the search bar, it'll come up. And we're getting some good traction and some good comments. So please feel free to engage and ask questions.
Brilliant. I'd encourage you to go and find that farmer that turned around and said, I seem to have 12 people from Defra on my back, but none of them have ever actually set foot on a farm in their life. I think that would make a wonderful comment if you could get that on social media by that wonderful farmer. That'd be absolutely brilliant. Mathew, I want to thank you so much for your time. Thank you for clearly laying out the issues that are being faced in that wonderful part of our United Kingdom, and thank you and for the disconnect and the concerns. So thank you, sir. And I just wonder if there is anything that you feel you've missed, anything that you would like to say.
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much for the invite. I very much appreciate it. It's been great talking to you, Mark. I think I would end on a point, which is don't believe what the polls say, because what you have to realize is polling companies are paid by people to create polls, and those polls always have an agenda, no matter what they may be. I mean, if Reform UK commissioned a poll, we would clearly have an agenda too. Let's face it, we want to portray ourselves in the best light. So when I'm speaking to people out there, there is a palpable excitement in the air. There's a sense of change needs to happen. And yes, you get people that don't want change. I completely agree with that. But I feel that in this general election, 2024, we have never really had this kind of opportunity before, where a party has stood so many candidates. I think we're at 600 plus or so. So, so many candidates from a party that has grown over the last 3 years from nothing to where we are today, and having a clearly defined, what I would call centrist stance in terms of policies. It's common sense stuff. It's stuff that people can get behind, but also it just makes sense. Ultimately, everybody, it doesn't matter who you are. We want to have something that occupies our time. We want to earn some decent money from it. We want to make sure that we live in a nice place, go on holiday every now and then, and we want public services to work. Now, no matter what the legacy parties will tell you, they don't have a plan for making it work. What they have a plan for is spending more money, and that just does not work. Just today I read they're literally going to burn 1.2 billion of PPE equipment they ordered during the pandemic, or whatever you wish to call that. 1.2 billion. Well, let me tell you, if you started counting to a billion right now, 33 years later, you'd still be counting to a billion. 1, 2, 3. No one has really any idea about what a billion is. We can't comprehend it, the normal human, and the astronomical sums of money that are being wasted every year is just ridiculous. So the one thing I would say to people is, a vote for reform is a vote for reform, because even if we do not get in, and we become the opposition, which is our aim, we're going to cause so much furore and so much anxiety for the other parties that maybe some of them may revise themselves, go back and look at themselves in the mirror and think, maybe we're not doing the right thing anymore. I'm kind of like in two places on that, whether that will happen, but my wish is very much that people look at what's going on out there and think, well, there's got to be a difference, there's got to be a change, and let's make that change happen, because otherwise future generations to come are going to be wondering, well, you had this choice and you had this chance and you chose red. I can't understand it, to be honest, but we'll see what happens come July the 4th.
Mathew, thank you so much for your time and for putting your case over, sir. And I wish you all the best with that. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us today on a fascinating interview. If you haven't liked, please click on the bell, follow me, subscribe. I would be very grateful, because I'm meeting some incredible people that I passionately believe that you also need to listen to as well. So thank you very much. Mathew, don't disappear. I'll say goodbye to you on the other side, but I'll just play us out. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you, Mark.